Jack Harris had always believed that a man's worth was measured by the work of his hands. For 30 years, those hands had shaped the heartbeat of Blake's Auto, a modest garage that, under Jack's watchful eye, became a second home for half the town. At 62, Jack wore his age like an old leather jacket, weathered, comfortable, and marked by stories only he could tell. The spring of 2024 found him in his usual spot, hunched over the faded hood of Mrs. Ramirez's stubborn Corolla, humming along to the radio as his fingers coaxed life from tired machinery. Jack's life was a patchwork of early mornings, honest sweat, and the quiet satisfaction of a job done right. He lived alone in a small brick house, his world revolving around the shop, the regulars who brought him homemade cookies, and the smell of oil that clung to his clothes long after he'd gone home. That morning, his mind was on the carburetor, not on the future. A future that, unbeknownst to him, was about to be wiped clean. It happened with the kind of abruptness that leaves a scar. Brian Blake, the new owner, summoned Jack into the office, a space that once held the warmth of old calendars and Polaroids, but now felt sterile, ruled by the cold glow of a computer screen. Brian didn't bother with small talk. "Jack, you're a legend here, but we need to modernize. You're just not efficient anymore." The words landed with a thud, each syllable stripping away decades of loyalty and pride. Jack stood silent, the weight of betrayal pressing against his chest as if the air itself had thickened. He didn't argue. He just nodded, picked up his battered red toolbox, its handle worn smooth by years of use, and walked out past the line of cars he'd nursed back to health. The world outside felt unfamiliar, the sky too wide, the street too quiet. For the first time in his adult life, Jack Harris had nowhere to go and nothing left to fix. The days blurred into weeks of hollow routines. Jack's mornings began with the same ritual, polishing his tools until they gleamed, only to pack them away again, untouched. Job applications led to dead ends. Shop managers half his age eyed his resume like a relic, their smiles tight as they muttered about cultural fit. One afternoon, after being turned away from a chain garage that reeked of synthetic air fresheners, Jack drove aimlessly, his truck's engine growling in tune with his frustration. He found himself on the outskirts of town, where the asphalt cracked into gravel, and there it stood. A sagging garage with boarded windows, its roof patched with moss and time. The faded sign read, "Martin's Auto, 1968-2003. And suddenly, Jack remembered Eddie Martin, the gruff mentor who'd taught him the difference between fixing cars and understanding them. The place was a corpse, but the sight made his pulse quicken. The door creaked open with a protest of rusted hinges, releasing a wave of dust and memories. Inside, sunlight seeped through bullet holes in the corrugated metal walls, illuminating workbenches buried under decades of grime. A vintage Ford pickup sat in the corner, its tires deflated but its frame stubbornly intact, a project Eddie had abandoned when arthritis stole his grip. Jack ran a hand over the truck's hood, feeling the ghost of potential beneath his palm. His toolbox, still in the bed of his own truck, seemed to hum with anticipation, but doubt slithered in. Who'd trust a washed-up mechanic in a dump like this? He knelt to inspect. The floor jack, its hydraulics seized with neglect, and for the first time since the firing, a smile tugged at his lips. "Hell," he muttered to the empty room, "can't be worse than retirement." Jack spent the next morning pacing the cracked concrete, his mind a storm of possibilities and fears. He made a mental inventory of what the shop needed. New lights, a working compressor, a miracle for the plumbing. The place smelled of old rubber and rain-soaked wood. But beneath the decay, Jack sensed a stubborn kind of hope, a place that, like him, refused to give up. He took out his phone and dialed a few old friends, but most were retired, moved away, or simply didn't answer. By noon, he was scrubbing the grime from a window with an oily rag, sweat stinging his eyes, when a familiar voice echoed from the doorway. "You always did like a challenge, Harris." Jack turned to see Eddie Martin himself, older and slower, but with the same mischievous glint in his eyes. Eddie leaned on his cane, surveying the chaos with a crooked grin. "I heard what happened at Blake's. Damn shame. but not the end of the road. He stepped inside, the cane tapping a steady rhythm on the floor, and handed Jack a thermos of coffee, black, just how he liked it. "What if we brought this place back to life?" Eddie's words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Jack hesitated, his pride bruised and his confidence shaky. But Eddie's faith was infectious. "I've got a little saved up," Eddie continued. "Enough to get us started. You've got the hands, I've got the stubbornness. What do you say?" For the first time in weeks, Jack felt the weight on his chest lighten. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't finished yet. They started the next day, working side by side as if no time had passed since Jack's apprenticeship decades ago. The first hours were spent hauling out piles of rusted parts, each piece a memory of repairs long forgotten. Eddie, despite his limp, was relentless. He directed Jack with a sharp eye, pointing out what could be salvaged and what belonged to the junk heap. They laughed over the discovery of an old carburetor signed by a customer who'd once paid in pies, and cursed together when a nest of spiders scattered from behind the fuse box. The work was grueling, but the rhythm of it, the scrape of metal, the clang of tools, the smell of fresh paint, began to stitch Jack's sense of purpose back together. Word traveled fast in a town where everyone knew everyone. By the end of the week, curious faces started appearing at the open bay doors. Old customers, drawn by the sight of Jack's familiar silhouette, stopped by to offer help, or just to reminisce. Mrs. Ramirez brought tamales and insisted on scrubbing the waiting room herself. A teenager named Lucas, who'd once watched Jack fix his mom's minivan, showed up every afternoon, eager to learn. The garage, once silent and forgotten, filled with laughter, clatter, and the low hum of hope. Jack found himself working longer hours, not out of necessity, but because he wanted to, because every bolt tightened and every wall scrubbed felt like reclaiming a piece of himself. As the days rolled by, Jack and Eddie's efforts began to show. The battered sign out front was repainted in bold red and white, the letters Martin and Harris Garage standing out against the blue sky. Inside, the air grew lighter as dust gave way to order. Jack installed new lights, their glow chasing away the gloom, while Eddie organized the tools with a precision that bordered on obsessive. The two men argued over everything from the placement of the coffee pot to the right way to tune a carburetor. But each disagreement ended in laughter. Jack's hands, cracked and stained, moved with a confidence he thought he'd lost. Every evening he'd lock up and stand outside for a moment, watching the sunset reflect off the fresh paint, feeling a quiet pride settle in his chest. But with every step forward, Jack couldn't shake the shadow of Ryan Blake. Rumors drifted in from town. Ryan had doubled his prices, cut corners on repairs, and let customer complaints pile up like junkyard scrap. Some nights, Jack lay awake in his small house, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he'd ever truly outrun the humiliation of being cast aside. Doubt crept in, whispering that maybe the world really had moved on, that honest work was a relic no one wanted anymore. Yet every morning, the sight of Eddie waiting by the garage door, cane in hand, and a stubborn smile on his face, pulled Jack out of bed. The garage wasn't just a building, it was a lifeline, a chance to prove that integrity still mattered. The first real test came on a rainy Thursday, when a battered Subaru limped into the lot, steam hissing from under its hood. The driver, a young mother named Carla, explained through tears that she'd already spent her savings at Blake's Auto, only for the problem to return worse than before. Jack listened quietly, nodding as she spoke, then rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He traced the issue to a cracked radiator hose, a simple fix, but one that Blake's team had missed or ignored. Jack replaced the hose, topped off the fluids, and refused to take a dime more than the cost of parts. Carla left with her car running smooth, and her faith in mechanics restored. By that evening, her story was already making the rounds on social media, neighbors sharing how the old guys at Martin and Harris still did things the right way. That single act sparked a ripple. Within days, more customers appeared. A delivery driver with a misfiring engine, a retired teacher whose pickup needed a new clutch, even a local pastor whose church van had been sitting idle for months. Each time Jack listened, explained, and fixed what needed fixing, never overselling, never cutting corners. The shop's waiting area, once echoing and empty, now buzzed with conversation and the smell of fresh coffee. Eddie kept a running tally on a chalkboard, grinning every time he had to erase and update the numbers. Jack felt his confidence returning, not in a rush, but in steady increments. Each satisfied customer a small victory, each handshake a reminder that he still belonged. It wasn't long before Ryan Blake noticed the shift. One morning, Jack spotted Ryan's sleek black SUV idling across the street. The windows tinted so dark, they reflected the world back in warped fragments. Ryan didn't get out, but his presence was a warning, a silent reminder that the past wasn't done with Jack yet. That afternoon, a customer mentioned that Blake's Auto had started running radio ads, promising faster service and unbeatable deals. Jack just shrugged, focusing on the carburetor in front of him, but Eddie caught the flicker of worry in his eyes. "Let him do his worst," Eddie said, voice rough but steady. "We're not in the business of shortcuts or empty promises." Despite the tension, Jack refused to let fear run the shop. He doubled down on what he knew best: honest work, fair prices, and treating every customer like family. The garage became a haven for people tired of being rushed or overcharged. Kids rode their bikes past the open doors, waving at Jack and Eddie as they worked. On Fridays, Mrs. Ramirez brought tamales for everyone, and Lucas, the eager teenager, started learning how to change oil and rotate tires. The community's trust grew, woven from the small, everyday acts of kindness and competence that Jack offered without fanfare. For the first time since losing his job, Jack felt not just useful but necessary, a feeling he hadn't realized he'd missed so much. But just as things seemed to settle, the peace shattered overnight. Jack arrived early one morning to find the garage doors pried open, the lights flickering weakly in the dawn. Inside, chaos reigned. Tool chests overturned, wrenches scattered like bones, and the prized diagnostic scanner smashed on the concrete floor. For a moment, Jack just stood there, the shock rooting him in place. Eddie arrived minutes later, his face darkening as he took in the damage. "This wasn't some random break-in," he muttered, voice trembling with anger. "Someone wanted to send a message." Jack's stomach churned with a mix of rage and helplessness, the old doubts bubbling up again. Had he been foolish to think he could start over? The news spread quickly, faster than Jack could sweep up the broken glass. By noon, a steady stream of neighbors and customers stopped by, some with coffee, others with tools or just a word of encouragement. Mrs. Ramirez showed up with her sons, who began hauling debris to the curb. Lucas arrived with his father, offering to help fix what had been broken. Even people Jack barely knew dropped off donations. An old torque wrench here, a set of jumper cables there. The outpouring of support was overwhelming, and as the sun set over the battered shop, Jack realized something he hadn't felt in months: hope. The garage might have been vandalized, but his spirit and the community's faith in him remained unbroken. That evening, after the last neighbor left and the garage finally grew quiet, Jack and Eddie sat together on the stoop, their backs pressed against the cool brick. The air was thick with the scent of cut grass and distant barbecue, the sky streaked with the colors of a fading day. Jack's fingers throbbed from hours of sweeping, hammering, and sorting, but the pain felt almost welcome, a reminder that he was still needed, still a part of something bigger than himself. Eddie poured them both a cup of lukewarm coffee from his battered thermos, his hands shaking just a little as he handed Jack a mug. "You see all those people today?" Eddie asked, voice rough but warm. "That's not just about cars, Jack. That's about you, about what you've given this town." Jack swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in his eyes. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed feeling seen. When Jack arrived at the garage the next morning, he was greeted by a sight that nearly stopped him in his tracks. Lucas and a handful of other teenagers were painting a mural across the shop's battered sidewall, vivid gears and wrenches swirling around the words, "Honest work, honest people." The colors exploded against the dull gray, transforming the old building into something alive and proud. Inside, Eddie was already at work, sorting through the mountain of donated tools, humming an off-key tune that echoed through the open bay doors. The garage was still, rough around the edges, but it buzzed with new energy. Every corner touched by the hands of people who believed in Jack's way of doing things. For the first time since losing his job, Jack felt a deep, unshakable sense of belonging. He realized then that what they were building wasn't just a business, but a home. One forged from trust, sweat, and second chances. News of the community's support spread quickly, and soon, even people from neighboring towns began stopping by. They brought cars with tricky problems, stories of being overcharged elsewhere, and more often than not, a pie or a bag of fresh produce as thanks. Jack treated each customer with the same patience and honesty he always had, explaining repairs in plain language and never charging a cent more than necessary. Eddie kept the books with a careful hand, making sure every donation and expense was accounted for. The garage's reputation grew not because of flashy ads or discounts, but because word of mouth carried a kind of weight that no billboard ever could. Jack found himself smiling more, cracking jokes with customers, and even teaching Lucas the finer points of timing belt replacement. But not everyone was happy about the shop's success. One afternoon, Ryan Blake himself stormed into the garage, his suit immaculate but his eyes cold. He accused Jack of stealing customers, of spreading lies about Blake's auto, his voice echoing off the freshly painted walls. Jack listened, steady and calm, letting Ryan's anger burn out. When it was his turn to speak, Jack simply said, "People come here because they trust us, that's all." The confrontation ended with Ryan storming out, but the tension lingered for days. Jack worried that Ryan might try something else, but Eddie reassured him. "You've already won, Jack. Not because you beat him, but because you never stooped to his level." Jack realized then that real victory wasn't about crushing the competition. It was about staying true to himself and the values he'd built his life around. With each passing week, the garage became more than just a place to fix cars. It was a hub for the community. People lingered long after their vehicles were repaired, sharing stories, advice, and sometimes even their troubles over cups of strong coffee. Jack found himself listening more, offering a kind word or a practical solution when he could. Lucas, once shy and uncertain, started taking on small jobs by himself, his confidence growing under Jack's steady guidance. Eddie, too, seemed to come alive again, his laughter echoing through the shop as he swapped stories with old friends and new faces alike. The walls, once bare and stained, now held photos of customers and their cars, each one a testament to the trust that had blossomed between Jack and the people he served. One crisp Saturday morning, Jack stood outside the garage, watching the sunrise paint gold across the mural. He felt a quiet satisfaction settle in his bones, a sense that, despite everything, he had found his place again. The hardships and humiliation of losing his old job hadn't destroyed him. They had forced him to rebuild, to rediscover the heart of his work and the value of community. As customers arrived, waving and smiling, Jack realized he was no longer defined by the name on a paycheck or the approval of a boss. He was defined by the respect he'd earned, the lives he'd touched, and the hope he'd helped restore. The garage wasn't just his second chance. It was proof that integrity, kindness, and hard work could still change the world, one honest repair at a time. That afternoon, as the shop buzzed with activity and laughter, Jack caught a glimpse of Ryan Blake driving by, his car slowing just enough for their eyes to meet. There was no anger left in Jack, only a quiet understanding. Ryan, for all his bluster and business acumen, had lost something far more valuable than customers. He'd lost the trust of a community. Jack turned away, focusing instead on Lucas, who was proudly showing a customer the work he'd done on her car. Eddie clapped Jack on the back, grinning. "Told you this old place had life left in it." Jack just smiled, feeling the truth of it settle deep inside him. The pain of the past had faded, replaced by a new sense of purpose and belonging. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Jack locked up the garage, the mural glowing in the last light of day. He stood for a moment, breathing in the cool evening air, grateful for every setback that had brought him here. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been real, marked by sweat, setbacks, and the steady hands of friends who refused to let him fall. Jack Harris, once discarded and doubted, had rebuilt more than a business. He'd restored hope, dignity, and trust, not just for himself, but for everyone who believed in second chances. And as he walked home, toolbox in hand, he knew that his legacy would live on in every honest repair, every shared laugh, and every person who found their way to the little garage on the edge of town.